All right, welcome back to the channel. So this is going to be part 2 of my side deck tier list, and it's going to be based on spells. Full disclosure here, spells actually suck. Like, they really suck as far as side decking them goes. Most of the spells that people play are just in their main decks, and they're very good. But if you look at the list here, I think there's like 17 of them. They're awful. Like, most of them are very situational or mid. And compared to monsters and traps, like, side decking spells is just not really the way. Now, obviously, there are some exceptions. There's always exceptions in Yu-Gi-Oh! Nothing is an absolute. But yeah, when I look at these cards, I'm like, man, a lot of these are just not that impactful. And then I started looking at the decks that topped and what they side, and most people just side monsters and traps. And sometimes you side a spell or two here and there, but like for the most part, yeah, monsters and traps in Edison format anyway are way better than the spells that people side. So let's start off the same way we did the monster video with an S tier. And this could be the only S tier on the entire list, but Super Poly is not okay. And this is, in my opinion, the most powerful spell that you could side deck in Edison format. It's also one of the most powerful cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, like from right now and all the way back to 2010 or whatever. This is insane. This card is still played in Modern. It goes in and out of the format. It's really good in Edison format, and it is interesting. It wasn't really sided, at least by most people, until 2023. Like, I want to say the rise of the Hero Frog decks and the Diva Hero Beat decks have definitely made this card a lot better. And as I always say, the format being a lot of Miracle Fusion decks. In fact, I looked at Peak of the Beak that just ended, and I think that there were 6 decks in the top 8 that were playing Miracle Fusion. So that's absurd. Super Poly is insane. You can't chain anything to it. You can do kind of like crazy chain blocking stuff where you do a chain link one like Swap Frog, and then chain link to Super Poly, and your opponent can't bottomless or torrential. If you remember, I did that actually in tournament, and my opponent did have bottomless and tried to use it on my 0, and you can't. It's really hard to play around this card. A lot of times, if you try to play around it, you play into a Monarch as a result, because you're like, okay, if I put one guy on the field, the Super Poly won't be as bad. But then that just plays directly into what Monarchs want to do. And the fact that there is really no response to it, like you literally have to watch it resolve, is crazy. So I think as long as Hero Frogs and all of the Hero Beats and Diva Hero decks are basically the best decks, like as long as that's the case, this card is going to forever be insane. Okay, next up is a card that I remember when I first joined Edison format, I couldn't really understand why I saw people siding Twister. And of course, maybe the meta was a lot different back then. It was 100% less developed compared to where it is right now. So maybe Mask Restrict was really that card. But right now, no one really sides Mask Restrict, and the Hero Frog deck that I've made popular only plays 4 Monarchs anyway, so like Mask Restrict is just not really it. Pulling the Rug is far better, because once the Mask Restrict is off the field, all of the Monarchs that they've been holding are going to just run train on you for the next several turns after the Floodgate is gone, whereas Pulling the Rug at least will kind of like skip their turn. But yeah, Twister. This card is only good against Mask Restrict and maybe Zombie World, and I also feel like Zombie World fell from grace as well. I'll talk about that in a second, but I can't imagine siding something this narrow right now. Like, it only hits face-up cards, and you have to pay life points. So in theory, I was like, oh, well, against Blackwings, you can hit Black Whirlwind, and if Blackwings side Mask Restrict, but then Blackwings don't side Mask Restrict for multiple reasons. 1, because the card is mid, and 2, because it stops their own Icarus attack. So like, even best case scenario, you play against a deck like Blackwings that has Black Whirlwind that you want to hit with this card, it's not even good in that matchup for multiple reasons on top of that. 1, it costs 500 life points to actually activate this card, and against Blackwings, you need all of your life points. I'm not joking, that deck will kill you if you are down at any amount, because Kalud or swarming the field with Boras and Sirocco and Gale and all that stuff, like, you know how it is. You've played this format enough, you've seen this format enough, you know that Blackwings can out of nowhere just hit you with like a crazy amount of damage in one turn, and 500 could be a make or break. So the fact that this card costs life points is bad. The fact that it only hits face-up cards, when right now I think the most important thing you need to hit is like Pulling a Rug. It doesn't do what it needs to do, and the only deck that would side this anyway is Frogs from what I saw. So we'll put it in C tier. Nolman to Crossout. So this card is, I have a love-hate relationship with this card. It's kind of like DD Crow, in a sense that when it's good, it can be very good. Like if you cross out someone's Raikou, that is really good for you, because it gives you information, and if they happen to have Hamster still in their deck for some reason, then like they're dead. Most decks that play Raikou need the Raikous to mill in order to get freebies from their graveyard or set up Pot of Avarice or whatever, so crossing that out specifically is just very good to happen. And if you're already in a winning position, cross out is insane, because your opponent's forced to set, and then you have this tempo going, and you can just further push your advantage. But then at the same time, there are games that you'll play where you'll side and cross out and your opponent just won't set a monster. And it's not because they're necessarily playing around cross out. It's just that because of how inconsistent everything is in Edison, sometimes the hands that people draw just don't set monsters. For example, I know some people like to side cross out against Value Turbo, but that deck can play an entire game without setting. It can just go Greffer and Armageddonite and Caius and Armwing and all that stuff, and you just don't see them ever set a Raikou against you. And then there are games where they just set every single turn, and you get kind of annoyed that you have to grind through all of their set monsters. And that might make you want to side and cross out, and then you do it, you kind of fall for the trap. So it's very wishy-washy on what this card will do in any given game, and I hate cards like that. But I understand that some decks can't deal with set monsters. Like I think, for example, Hero Beat has a really big problem with Snowman Eater. Hamster is annoying, Raikou's annoying, all those cards. So cross out for that deck makes sense. And maybe even a deck like Fairies that also struggles with all the same cards I just said, like cross out, I can see making sense for those decks. But still, it's just so risky, and I hate it. I'm gonna put it in B tier. It's not god awful, but like it's not my favorite. Okay, so in A tier, I'm gonna put Soul Exchange because this card is actually just insane. So Monarchs are mainly the deck that sides Soul Exchange, and it kind of deals with all the cards that Monarchs have a problem with, like Fossil Dyna, Vanity's Fiend, Christia, depending on what you tribute for. And also just going second and soul exchanging your opponent's monster and then substituting on your first turn, and you kind of steal going first when you do that. It's such a strong play to dupe block on your first turn when your opponent went first, and especially if they set a monster or something, it's really bad for them. But soul exchange is crazy. It outs a lot of the problematic things that you could face. And soul exchange Caius is very, very strong. It's not as strong as brain control Caius, but it's up there because taking away 2 of your opponent's monsters without destroying them too. Like one is getting tributed, one is getting banished. But one is getting tributed, one is getting spun to the top, or both are getting tributed in the case of substitute. It's really, really strong. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Soul Exchange. I'm going to put it in A tier. Okay, Zombie World, I'm going to say, is another C tier card. So there was a period where I liked this, and that was when the Machina Control deck kind of premiered, and you saw both players. I think both players might have decided that maybe only one of them did actually. But in theory, this card is amazing because it turns everything into a zombie, so there's no more contacting your machines away with Cyber Dragon, and that's a huge thing. The problem is Machina Control isn't really that big of a deal anymore, especially in a Monarch-heavy format like we are right now. That kind of sucks against Monarchs. It sucks against Frogs. And it's weird because this card is supposed to be like an anti-Monarch / anti-Frog card because you can't tribute for Caius or Rise or whatever. But again, the hero deck that is currently popular, the Frog hero deck that's currently popular, one, it only plays for Monarchs. So there's that. After game 1, you're not even sure if they have all 4 of the men. Like the 3 Kaises will stay for sure, but then like Ryza might not even be in the deck anymore. So a lot of the times this isn't even stopping anything that you really need it to stop. Like it doesn't stop Miracle Fusion, doesn't prevent that card in any way. It doesn't prevent Substitute from doing nonsense. And Substitute going into Unifrog is problematic. And the fact that it only prevents tribute summons of non-zombie monsters, but not just tributing period, is really obnoxious. I mean, I guess if it stopped tributing period, it would be way better than Mask and Restrict. But like, yeah, you can still do Substitute stuff, and the Substitute can get Unifrog, so it can just pop this card easily. And for all of those reasons, I think that this is pretty mid. The System Down is another card that I'm going to put in a C tier. So I guess the problem with it is just that the deck that it's narrowly focused on isn't even that popular anymore. So right now in Edison, as of August 2023, like System Down is just not very good. There aren't many machine decks that you'll play against in this format. And even if you do, it's probably better to just size Cyber Dragon than System Down. I do think 1,000 life points is pretty steep. Banishing the machines is cool or whatever, so that Fortress can't come back and they can't play Pot of Avarice, but Cyber Dragon just gives you advantage and damage in the same turn, and it makes you go plus. It just does a lot more. So if I ever had to pick between Cyber Dragon and System Down, it's typically just going to be Cyber Dragon. Cyber Dragon just does way more things. It can be tributed for Caius, it can attack over a monster and then tribute for Caius. It can just do a lot. Unless somebody cooks up a really good machine deck going forward, I don't really see this card being in too many side decks. Okay, Soul Release. This is a very popular card, and it's been popular for like a year now. And I get that because it can hit a lot of things at once, especially when you're playing against decks that play Miracle Fusion because they have the water and the heroes, and sometimes the DD Crow can't get all of it. The same is true against the Phoenician Cluster Amaryllis plant deck, like same thing there. You want to be able to hit multiple plants and all of the clusters out the grave. So Soul Release is good. My problem with it is when people thought it was okay to side more than one of it. Like, I'm not a fan of siding more than one in this card. You never want to draw more than one. Let's be real. I get that you want to draw it, but if the game goes long and you end up drawing into more than one, you're sick. This is the prime example of a card that you side one of it. If you draw it, great. If you don't draw it, whatever. It's decent enough that I could see teching just the one copy in the side deck. It's not overpowered or anything like that, but it can make or break some games, and I get that. But yeah, nothing too crazy. And I think in the same vein, since we're talking about that, I want to talk about Burial. Because there are some times when I say Frog player side Burial, and I think it's just unnecessary. Like, this card is only playable if your opponent specifically banishes both of your Treeborn Frogs. And I don't like that. That is such a narrow thing to have happen in any game. Like, I've played Frogs for a long time now, and that just doesn't really come up. Like, them banishing both of your Treeborns is so rare in a game. And then also, like, that's not even the end of the game for the Frog deck. Spoiler alert, but it just isn't. Like, Frogs can play with both their Treeborns banished, especially Hero Frogs. Because the way it's built, it's not just a Monarch deck, it's not just a Frog deck, it's not just a Hero deck, it's all three. It has three different engines working all together. And so it's very hard to play against and side against, and it's built like that on purpose. So Burial, like, I get it, if both your Treeborns get banished or something, then sure. And then if your opponent crows your Treeborn in a standby phase, then you could Burial and bring it back in the same standby phase, and then bring it back naturally like you would have, but that's best case scenario. I think people are starting to get to the point where they don't even really side DD Crow against Frogs because they realize it's just really not that great. And so Burial gets worse as a result of that. But yeah, I've never been a fan of this. I basically never sided this card in Frogs. I never saw the point of it. Every time I think about it, and honestly, the way I built my decks, I just theorize things. I don't actually like need to test them. And this is something that I've never even bothered to really test. I was just like, okay, you know what? I just don't think this card is going to be good. And I don't need to play a million games to find that out. I can just read it and be like, yeah, this isn't it. So I have this card in B tier. It's the only deck that sides it, I'm pretty sure, is Frogs anyway. The other decks that would play Burial would just main it. Like, Zombies just main it, Value Turbo just mains it. And so we're just talking about side deck cards. As a side deck card, it is mid. It is in the B tier, it's in the mid tier. But yeah, that's how I feel about it. Okay, so another card that I'm going to say is mid and in the B tier, and I know there's a lot, but I said spells aren't that great to side deck in general. So like, look at how situational this whole tier is. Like, everything in here is very situational, right? And My Body as a Shield is the exact same thing. It's a very situational side deck card. I get why people side it. You want to negate things like Deck Devastation Virus and Icarus Attack, and if you're lucky, you can get a Bottomless or Torrential for it too. But 1500 is a shit ton of life. Siding this against Blackwings, again, the deck that plays Icarus and Deck Devi and stuff like that, it makes sense, but then when you consider the 1500 life points, you're like, well, shit, I might just lose the game to damage, and My Body as a Shield isn't really helping. It's great if you draw it in the opening. Like, if you open My Body as a Shield, the card is honestly good, because you're at full life, and that's the time when they're going to have their Icarus attack, most likely. Like, in the beginning, they play 3 of it. A lot of them don't side it out. But my other problem with it is that it doesn't even actually stop Deck Devastation Virus unless it's in a specific situation. So Deck Devi hits things on the field and in the hand, but if you don't have anything on the field, you can't use My Body as a Shield, because My Body as a Shield specifically says it has to be destroying a monster on the field, which means anyone who plays Deck Devastation Virus against a deck that they know might have My Body as a Shield, basically just fairies, I would think. You just shotgun it in their draw phase. You don't let them summon a Shining Angel or a Dimensional Alchemist or a DD War Leader or anything. You don't try to get extra value. You just shotgun your Deck Devastation Virus in draw phase, and it will cripple their entire hand, and that will just be the game. And even if it doesn't cripple their entire hand, the information you gain from a card like this, I think, is enough to win the game if you're a good player. So yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with this card because I've seen it be very good, but I've also seen it just be ass. And just like everything else in B tier, it's a coin flip on whether or not it's going to be good in a game. Like, it could literally be the reason you won a game or the reason you lost a game. And that's basically the case for everything in B tier. Now, something I think is actually good is Mind Control. I really like Mind Control as a side deck card and as a main deck card. So decks that play a lot of tuners naturally can just play Mind Control. Anything that plays Triple Diva, usually Plague Spreader Zombies are in those decks, like Zombies or Diva Hero, 2 other S tier decks. Mind Control is really good for them, and they can main it, they can side it, they can do whatever, but it's also really good as a side deck card against another deck that's playing Hamster Raikou. So if you're playing Hamster Raikou, Mind Control should probably be in your side deck to just steal opposing Hamster Raikous. It is game breaking. It is one of the most ridiculous things. In a value mirror match, someone sets a Raikou or a Hamster and you Mind Control it and take it, huge. It's honestly the scariest thing about those decks, in my opinion. Like, when I play around with Value Turbo, and it's games 2 and 3, and I set a monster, I am so nervous that my opponent's just going to Mind Control it. But yeah, not much else to say on this. I think that it's a fantastic card. I mean, it's very close to like Brain Control, of course, but it can take face downs, which is insane. And yeah, I'm just going to put it in A tier. Okay, Book of Moon. So I think that this card is also very mid. There was a period where I didn't know any better because I was a new Frog player and I was citing 3 of this card because like, oh, it puts Fossil Diner face down, it puts Vanity's Fiends face down, it puts Christia face down, and then you can bring back your Treeborn Frog and do stuff like that. And then I realized I don't want those cards on the field. I just want to remove them. I'd rather side Torrential and Mirror Force and Compulse. Book of Moon in theory is a lot better than it is in actual play. And so I've completely forgone it. Like if you look at the list that are doing well with Hero Frogs now, they're all kind of following suit and not really doing the Book of Moon side deck as much. I think it makes sense for certain frog decks. I don't think that Hero Frogs need it as much because the thing is, Hero Frogs can beat over Fosdiner naturally. Like that's not a problem for that deck at all. It plays Stratos, Alias, Ocean, and Junk Synchron. So that's 4 cards, and they are searchable cards too. There's a Rhoda and an E-Call in the deck, and you don't side those cards out, obviously. So then, like most games, you just beat over a Fosdiner by attacking it. Now, if you're playing a more dedicated strategy that doesn't have something to beat over Dyna, then I can see Book of Moon being a little bit better. But yeah, in the best frog deck, which is the Hero Frog deck, I would say Book of Moon is very mid and unnecessary. I don't see any other deck really siding Book of Moon. I'm trying to think about what would, because if it sides it, it probably just mains it. But there was a period where this card was heavily sided or mained at 3 and all that stuff. And I think it's good in the main deck. Like I think Black Wings do go with it for obvious reasons, like Shura and all that stuff, Bora trampling, stopping opposing whirlwind searches. Like it's a good card. Book of Moon itself is a good card. I'm not saying that the card is bad. I'm saying in the side deck. You got to think about it. We only get 15 slots. Are you really going to use it on Book of Moon? Like let's be real. D Fisher is pretty bad. It's because though the decks that would side D Fisher are also bad. Like I can't think of a single S tier deck. All the S tier decks are graveyard decks, right? It's like Black Wings, Vayu, all types of frogs, Hero Beat, Diva Hero, zombies. Like they're all just graveyard decks. So none of the S tier decks play D Fisher. So that's the first thing. Most of the A tier decks don't even play D Fisher. And I don't really know what would side this card. Glad Beast, I guess, but I don't have a high opinion of that deck either. So yeah, D Fisher, like in theory, you look at everything in S tier, you're like, oh man, this is so good. But like, then what are you playing where you can play it in your main, you can play it in your side deck, and your deck be good enough to beat those decks? If a deck is going to play D Fisher, I should probably just main it. That's how I feel. So yeah, I'm as a side deck card, again, this is a side deck tier list. As a side deck card, I'm gonna put it in C tier. Okay, Prohibition, it's another card that is pretty mid in Edison format. In theory, though, I could see this card becoming a lot better. So just how people didn't realize how good Super Poly was a year ago, I think Prohibition one day could actually just be insane because calling Alias, calling Treeborn Frog, those things can be extremely detrimental to the decks that play them. Even calling things like Gores before you attack is absurd. Or just calling exactly what would beat you the same way you would do with Mind Crush. Like if you know Brain Control is the card you lose to, you're just like, all right, fuck it. I'm just gonna Prohibition call Brain Control and say go. And if you can't deal, I win the game. I can see things like that. In a good player's hands, Prohibition gets better, the same way Mind Crush does. But it just doesn't have enough data to support it right now. So because of how wishy-washy it is, it's in B tier. Now the thing is, it's probably best against frogs because frogs have an 80% chance of opening up Treeborn Frog. So at least against that matchup, you can always line up your Prohibition with Treeborn Access and just cut it off. But you already know that the frog deck is going to side in Spell and Trap removal, like Dark Tornadoes and stuff like that, Unifrog and all that. So I don't know. It's another one of those coin flippy cards that could be good in theory, but then there's other cards that you can side that I think are just better against frogs that we've covered in the monster video and we'll definitely cover in the trap video. But I guess I should also mention that it doesn't do anything against established cards, and that is problematic. Like if your opponent already has Alias on the field, Prohibition doesn't do anything. And so it's a card that you need before the incident happens in the same way you need Soul Release before your opponent gets to summon JD or summon Christia. And it's part of the reason why I don't really care for Soul Release like that, especially outside of playing just one copy of it. Prohibition's in that same boat. It says it excludes cards that are already on the field. So you can't play Prohibition and call Mirror Force and then attack with everybody and your opponent has a back row because it could just be Mirror Force and Prohibition does not affect that. Some people actually don't know that. I was watching an online tournament recently. I was watching a replay and I saw that exact thing happen. Like the guy played Prohibition and called Mirror Force and then attacked, and the guy actually had Mirror Force and did not flip it. And I was like, holy shit. I know that Yu-Gi-Oh players don't read cards, but like, damn, you're making Prohibition way better. Could you imagine Prohibition, like call Torrential, then summon fucking 5 monsters or whatever with Black Wings and attack your game? Like that's insane. And then the next 3, so Lightning Vortex, Smashing Ground, Soul Taker. There's like this weird tier that I think I want to create that is a little bit better than B tier, but definitely worse than A tier. And I would say that all 3 of these go in that tier. So we're going to make a B plus tier. And all three of these are just going to go in it. I think that all of these, I get why they're sided. So things like Dragon Turbo side, Lightning Vortex, sometimes you see Zombie sided or whatever. It just deals with problematic cards like Fossil of Vanity's Fiend, Quacky Mirror Drago, all that stuff. Consecrated Light, whatever. Like those decks, you know, they side Lightning Vortex. Norlaris can side that card as well. It just deals with a lot of monsters because people tend to pressure Dragon Turbo, Norlaris, and stuff like that. As soon as they notice you're playing that deck, they're like, well, that's a defenseless deck. So I can just go all in. And Lightning Vortex helps to capitalize on that counterplay. So it's a counter to the counterplay. And then Smashing Gun and Soul Taker, they're both really good. I've seen people side them. I think that Soul Taker is the one that I would personally go for, though, just because it can cause things to miss timing. Like making Dimensional Alchemist miss timing, making Duprog miss timing. Those things matter to me. I know that Smashing Gun doesn't target, so if your opponent chains Book of Moon, it'll still kill something, but I think that scenario is so rare that I don't really care for it. And the 1,000 life point thing, like, honestly, whatever. I think mathematically, the number of games that you'll lose because your opponent got an extra 1,000 life points are very low. I mean, this year, like, right before Nationals, we saw a deck with triple upstart win the tournament. So the life point game part doesn't really matter to me, but I do like the fact that it makes things miss timing. And if you're siding this against a deck that can play Christia, they probably also play other things that you want to miss timing. So yeah, I like Soul Taker. I like Smashing Gun. I like Lightning Vortex. I don't think they're as good as like Mind Control and Soul Exchange, but I don't think they're as bad as everything that's wishy-washy in the B tier. So this is basically the list. Now look at that. There's like a nice little rhythm to the way it goes. I like the way it looks. And that was unintentional. But let me know what you think about this. Let me know if there was any spell cards that are side deckable that I didn't include. I tried to go through the top 8 deck list from several tournaments throughout the year and grab everything. One of them that I forgot to add in was Power Filter. So that card like prevents Treeborn from coming back. But I just think that it's a little too narrow, again, to really play. Hero Frogs can play well through that card. So we'll probably just be in B or C tier if you're wondering. But outside of that, yeah, I can't really think of anything else that's really missing. But you guys can let me know, leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I will catch you in the next one. Peace.